All right, here we are. We are live. Everybody, GBR family, welcome to another On the Spot, August 31st. Our guest tonight is Stephen L Randell. He is the author of this book right here. My Child is an Addict, Navigating Through Your Child's Addiction. And I read the book, and it's as powerfully moving as it is informative. And I was speaking with him before we went live about how it's made me kind of rethink my relationship that's estranged with my own son. And time is precious, and what we do with that time really matters in the end. And try to do everything we can to not have regrets. Some things just don't work out, but it's our honest efforts that really, I think, matter in the end. And I'm pleased and honored to be talking with him tonight. And I'll get right into it. Stephen, any opening words?
Well, thank you for taking the time to have me on. Yeah, we had that discussion we had just prior to going live was quite good, and I thank you for that. And as we said, that's really the purpose of the book. Everyone pulls their own things out of it, and I get tons and tons of messages, and I appreciate and read them all. And it's very much along the lines of people find something from it that they can plug into their own lives. Never claim once to have it all figured out, and I certainly don't pretend to have all the answers. But if we can continue to do, the book can do just that. Everyone can pull that one little thing out of it that they can inject into their own lives in a positive way. I think that we've really accomplished something important.
Right, I couldn't agree more. I was telling Mr. Randell beforehand, this is kind of like a more formal interview. It's not really his testimony so much. I got my questions really based off of what I've read in the book, and we're kind of just really going to stick with that, I think. And then, feel free, Stephen, to just talk about whatever you'd like after the questions, wherever it takes you. But first question was, could you tell everyone what inspired you, if it's not obvious, to write such a powerfully personal book?
The inspiration was really, I can look back on, I'll call it more of a divine inspiration now in hindsight, but started, Trav, it wasn't that at all. I was in some therapy trying to learn how to deal with a young man who was in full-blown addiction, an active addiction. And I was losing the battle terribly, and a lot of things I was doing were not helpful. I was just trying to figure out what to do. Like typical of most parents, you don't know, you don't get prior training on these things. So I had started journaling about a couple of, maybe even 3 years ago now. I initially started just journaling. I would write out my thoughts, ideas. I've always been a little bit of a writer, but writing as more of a therapeutic thing, or just get my ideas out or what have you. And I have another episode, and I spend a little time writing about that, and something else might happen in life. So I was writing out all these things and what I was learning, what I could do better. And I was finding it actually quite therapeutic just to be, and I've learned now that's an actual thing, which I didn't know at the time, that, writing things, getting things out of your head onto paper is actually quite a therapeutic thing. So that's how it started. And then tragically, just around 2 years ago, on July 15th of 2022, my son, Zachary, did indeed die of an overdose, tragically. And it was a few months later after that is when I actually gathered up all this writing and said, I just felt that I should do something with that. And that's when it became it went from a lot of notes into a written, an endeavor to put together written work.
I don't know if it's too personal, but I know if I don't ask, it'll be something everybody thinks about. I'd rather than not make an assumption. Would you care to tell people what his drug of choice was?
What killed him was cocaine. He was using, towards the last, I'll say 6 months, or even a little more than that, but certainly the last 6 months of his life, he was kind of anything he was getting his hands on at that point, between prescription medication, even the stuff he was supposed to take, he wouldn't take properly. So everything became about chasing the drug. And so, but to answer your question directly, at the end, it was you use cocaine, which causes heart to stop, and and that's where he died.
Right. And I mean, I just basing off what I read in the book that maybe an official ruling was, that he had an enlarged heart due to years of, using. And this last time was really kind of what made his heart go out, so to speak.
Absolutely, that's yeah. So it's not that he used in this extreme amount that finally got the better of him. It's just it was his prolonged use had basically weakened his heart. So when he used again, because he had been clean for a little while, and he went on a binge, as they say, fell off the wagon. He went on a binge, and sadly, just thinking he could do exactly what he did before and live to tell the tale, so to speak. And this time, sadly, his heart just couldn't take it, and so his heart failed, and he died right there on the side of a trail.
How old was he again?
He just 3 weeks past his 26th birthday. He turned 26 on June 24 of 2022, and July 15th was this somewhere around between noon and 1 p.m. is when he actually passed away.
Wow. Speaking on the part hanging on by a thread, heartbreak, injustice, and helplessness. Can you describe how those three burdens are such heavy and personal crosses to carry for parents, especially?
When you run into this and this gets infected into your family, you didn't ask for it, you didn't plan for it, you have no idea prior training of how to deal with it, unless you're some professionally trained person. How would you? And so you go into complete desperation survival mode, and everything you do seems like nothing works. So you're constantly heartbroken to watch them slowly dying, because that's what it feels and looks like. And you're so frustrated and feeling so helpless because you don't know what to do. And everything you've ever done to interact with them up to that point, you've learned to have a way to deal with your loved ones. Everyone does. But imagine everything you've ever done now, all of a sudden, none of that works anymore, because you don't have the experience enough yet to realize you're dealing with something different now. You're not dealing with that same person you successfully dealt with, let's say, up to a certain age. And for Zach, up till 17, 18 years old, he was great. Post that, everything I did in our healthy interactions and none of it worked anymore. So, I mean, that's the real helplessness. And no matter, you feel like every choice you make has just no upside. It's just pick this bad or pick that bad. And that is the really unfair, helpless, frustrating, heartbreaking piece of it. Yeah, and that wears on you sometimes for years. And that's why I have such a heart for I say parents, but not just the parents, the loved ones, will say, those that are surrounded someone in struggling with really, really bad mental illness or inactive addiction. I mean, the burden on those closest in your trying to love and care someone in that place in their life. It is the most heart-wrenching thing to watch, and it's I really feel for those people because I know what it feels like.
My next question was, could you describe, if you would, the mental and physical transformations that you witnessed with your son Zach during his addiction, and how he went from the Zach you always knew and loved and wanted to be around, and to a stranger in many aspects.
And that's as good as an explanation you could give anyone. You're now dealing with a new person. They look the same, which is so confusing. But I often refer to it as the tale of two Zachs. And any parent in this example, listen to this, can relate to this, I assure you. Because all of a sudden, that person you would have a good relationship with, now all of a sudden it's a toxic relationship. And you're trying to interact with them the same way, and nothing works anymore. They're not interested in your regular conversations. Now it's more of a now it's more, it's all what I know to call now. It's all desperation and drug seeking behavior, all kind of bundled up into one. So what happens is we take it so personal, and how could you not? Like they're yelling at you, or they're really upset with you, or fighting with you, you have disagreements, and you're trying to say, no, don't do that, choose this, and you're trying to negotiate, and you feel like nothing's working. And in hindsight, again, I could look back and say, well, he was unwell, and the drug, once full-on active addiction has taken over, the drug is always first choice. Drug is always first. So even though they might love you underneath, they can't demonstrate that, because it's all, the focus is get to the drug, no matter at any cost. And that's where the transformation really happens. All of a sudden, like they're not acting like themselves. They don't speak to you the way they used to speak to you. So your whole dynamic definitely changes. And again, the tough and confusing part is that you're looking at the same person, but it's like another personality has taken over that person you know and love.
The hope to despair roller coaster in dealing with a person's addiction, especially your own child's. Maybe elaborate a little bit more on like the early stages when you first started noticing these transformations, and that there was, a problem, putting it lightly, and that you saw these changes in him that were subtle at first, and then more consistent, and then just how was like your hope in the beginning to be like, oh, it's just a phase. He's experimenting, he'll get out of it, and my old Zach will be back, and he'll be right back to who he was and how I've always known him to be. This isn't going to change him any. Like, how quickly did your hope go from hope to despair?
Well, not only does it go quickly, it goes quite often. This is an ongoing thing. So once you realize, at some point, if you're engaged at all, you're going to realize there's some acceptance comes to the point of, okay, we have a problem. There is a problem here. Because at the beginning, you might not even be there. You just might think, as you said, Trav, like, oh, it's a phase, or it's maybe just experiment. Maybe I'm worrying too much, or over worrying, or whatnot. But once you at some point realize there's a problem, so what happens then? Your baseline changes, meaning that your expectation for them is so low. They do anything that even resembles normal. Oh, and I think I gave the example of Zach in the book of like just bothering to call you when they said they were going to call. Now, for you and I, if you said I'm going to call you at 8 p.m. and you called me at 8 p.m., I wouldn't be super over the moon. What a great job Trav did. He said he'd call at 8, and he called me at 8. When you're dealing with someone in that space, all of a sudden it's actually, you're like, oh, they called, like right on time, like they said they were going to call. They're making a lot of improvements here. So you build up this false hope when they're only doing, like, you had 3 kids and the other 2 weren't in any kind of active addiction, you wouldn't have the same benchmark you would for that. So you build up this also almost false hope, or overdoing the hope, and guaranteed, as long as they're in that space, here comes the crash, because you're going to be all excited. See, they turned the corner. They're doing so much better. Yeah. And then quickly thereafter, something happens. You realize they're in the same space. So I think we build up the hope so high, the crash is even worse. And I encourage people in the book, and as you might have noticed, I'm not, as they say, preachy in the book at all. I'm not, you must do this and you must not do that. I do offer suggestions, just basically from what I've learned, just from what I learned from going through the experience. But never like, I'm more like, try this. You might want to have a look at this and consider that. And but I do certainly say, just try to consider not welling up your hopes so high on the most smallest of detail, because at least that'll help if the disappointment comes again, the despair comes, it'll help you manage it. Your levels won't be so high and then so low and then so high and so low. It'll help you balance it out. And basically, it's a suggestion that the whole hope to display a roller coaster is just a suggestion to people so that, cut yourself some slack and help, to take it easy on yourself, because it's a brutally difficult experience. And
Yeah,
the thousands are going through it right now.
Those expectations can be exhausting. And rather quickly it can have an effect.
And we do them to ourselves. Yeah, and we do it to ourselves a lot of times. So that was my suggestion, that whole chapter, just like try to take it easy on yourself. Accept the fact that good, you're having a good moment. That's good. Yeah. Don't make it more than that. It's not like, oh, this is it. This is the moment they're going to turn the corner, because we want to believe it so bad. I understand why we do it, because it's exactly what we want to have happen, of course.
Yeah.
And not saying that one day that actually will happen, but just give yourself a little break in the process.
Sure. Healthcare system. What were your experiences with the healthcare officials overall? What were your opinions on the system in place that staff must work within and abide by the rules and regulations, protocols, and some thoughts on how it can all improve, not only for the workers, but families of the patients?
Well, the people in it are in my experience, are all trying their best. But the healthcare system, especially mental health, the addictions side of that, it's a behemoth. It's big bureaucracy. And like all these big organizations, change is not something they're good at. Improvement is, I believe, lots of good intent there. I don't spend any time, as you might have noticed and you read the book, I don't spend any time giving the whole system this terrible and tearing apart. And that's not my intent. Only to say that the system moves extremely slowly. So I think the expression I used once, if I remember, I may be paraphrasing, I said, but it can be summed up as where desperation meets delays. And I really believe that to be true. And you're coming in, so you're frustrated because you're desperate. And the first thing you're going to hit is delay. Everything takes longer than you wanted it to, even with the best people trying to do the best work. And when they tell you, okay, my son is trying to stay sober, and we want to get him into this program, he's all signed up, we've paid the money, we've signed the paperwork, and then someone in that system tells you, well, the way the system works is you got to have this appointment and this test done first, and that's going to be about 3 weeks. And you're sitting there. You mean we got to sit around for another 3 weeks? This is a window of time. He's sober and he's trying. Don't make us wait another 3 weeks. And that is one of my true stories. That conversation actually happened. But how many people does that happen to per day all over the planet? And that's a really frightening part for me, when you get those little windows of people wanting, I'm ready to try to get better for me. At least I'm ready to try. That's your little short window that you got to hop through right now. And telling someone like us at the time, myself and Zach, well, you're looking at about 3 weeks to get that test done. You get the results back before you can get your application approved.
Ugh.
That's where the extreme frustration comes in. And sadly, the last time that happened, remember I said earlier, it felt like a little bit like he died waiting, because when the police sat at my dining room table and told me that he had succumbed to his injuries, the paperwork for the rehabilitation center was next to me on the table. We had it filled out. We were waiting for our next appointment. And so it feels extremely unfair. And yes, there's a part of you want to run out and tear apart the system and take it all down and rebuild it. Of course. But that's not realistic. But that is the frustrating part, that I know so many loved ones who go through that on a way too frequent basis. And it's tough. It's very tough. And that's the frustrating thing about the system, despite all the wonderful people that are absolutely working in it.
Sure. I mean, it makes me think of two things. And I mean, the system is the thing. So if there's a rehab center in Canada and there's one out in New Mexico, the global healthcare system is like this you'll see this literature here. This paperwork here is the same as in those both places. And the thing that gets me is like insurance and money definitely come. The red tape, the bureaucracy. They have to, like, if people that write everything off and check all the balances and everything, they have to know that addicts, for the most part, are instant gratification seekers. They want something now. If I ask you for $20, I want it right now. I don't want to wait till you get paid. I don't want to go to the ATM. I want the $20. I want to go. It's instant gratification. So once an addict's finally like, okay, I'm going to go get some help, then they get there, and then the parent or friends excited. They're like, oh my gosh, here's that expectation. That roller coaster is coming to an end. And then it's like, oh, here's all this paperwork. You fill this out and do this and everything else. And I mean, that it causes a lot of them. And then the addict will see the frustration on the parent's face or their friend's face, and they're like, well, yeah, they're upset and impatient. Well, so am I. And they lose them. They lose so many before the ink's even dry on the paperwork. It is frustrating, and they can want it more than anything. And the delays sadly end in death for a lot of addicts, and it's sad. The one place there should not be a revolving door is rehab centers. I wish when they went there, when they honestly go there, some could just go there to go, but when somebody honestly goes to rehab and want the help that is there to have and to utilize, that should be the only time they have to go there. And yeah, I don't know. Yeah, you talk about wanting to like tear the whole system down. I mean, that's common. I mean, a lot of people definitely want to do that. But a question coming off of that is, do you feel in retrospect that some workers, some staff can become desensitized over time from seeing so many addictions come in and out the doors, at their facilities?
I think it's human nature. If you're a paramedic, you and I could go up to a scene of a terrible car accident and be pretty shocked. A paramedic could show up right behind us and be very calm about it because they've seen it. It's the fourth time they've seen that this week, right? So I think it's human nature to get a little desensitized, but not insensitive. There's the work in that field where they get up every day and their whole purpose is to care for people, some of our most vulnerable in society. So I think they can get a little bit desensitized because they see so much of it, but I don't think in any way, I never experienced that in any way, Trav. I didn't feel like someone didn't care this time. Oh, they're back here again with the same old. They know, right. And they're well trained enough. They know they will revolve the door a little bit. They'll try today, fall tomorrow, but try again next week. That does happen. And I have found, actually, the lady Tracy who wrote the foreword of my book worked in that field, and for 25 years or something, and still does. And I tell you, she's an angel. She's a saint, and she's still getting up and fighting the good fight every day. And there's people she's been seeing back and forth for years, right? And well, it's okay because today they want to try again. So long as they're alive. If the good Lord is keeping with us, then we can try again today. And so taken from her cue, I tell you, she's just a superstar in that world. And I think there's a lot. That's one I had the privilege to know, but there's many like her. So again, I'll go back to say, I'll finish the point with this to say, I think the people in the system are saints in my book. And not perfect and lots of challenges to go with it, but I think they're doing talk about doing God's good work. I would say that's what they're doing.
Right. Well, they're the ones who have to administer what they can, and then when they're not allowed or there's a delay, it's not coming from that immediate worker, that person in the hall, in the room, at the desk. It's coming from up the chain. They're the ones who have to face those families and be like, I wish I could just do this right now, but if I did, I'm probably fired or demoted or something. And that's probably the most difficult part, I feel, is like they know they want to do more, and sometimes they can, but if they're not allowed to, they're handcuffed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's terribly emotional, and I have nothing but respect for them, because that's got to be tough to go home to. Like, I can only imagine the stories they go home to. Like, so and so came back. This is his third time at the rehab, and he just needed this and everything. But he left an hour later because I had to tell him that this paperwork was coming, and it's just, yeah, it's unfortunate. But I mean, I do pray, and I'm grateful for all the ones that put the heart into it and do help. The success stories are the ones that we really should focus on and talk about the most, I believe. But stigmas of addiction, they're bad. I think they're really detrimental. Did you feel like the stigma of addiction played any detrimental part in the care that your son received at all?
Not in the care. In the care, I don't feel stigma at all. There's definitely stigmas that are in society, and people take a snapshot, I'll call it, of what you're seeing in this moment. If someone's acting out at the local shelter, waiting to line up to get a meal, or they're not well dressed, or not looking clean and things like that. I think people can look at that and take a snapshot. And if we're not careful, it's too easy to extrapolate that's their whole life. I said, no, that's a snapshot of one person in a difficult spot right now. So I think that stigma can exist. I do believe it's getting better. I really do. I think people are starting to realize there's a lot bigger picture. Someone just doesn't wake up like that. Doesn't show up in the world like that. They end up there through a series of circumstances. Some may be self-created, plenty aren't. But in the care side of things, to your point, I can say we had lots of frustrations with how the lack of speed in the system to get things done. But I only experience of the frontline workers, 99%, nothing but good stories to tell there. People tried their best. And when I talk to groups, I often remind them, as you remember, that care worker you're speaking to is as frustrated as you are. You're frustrated because you're not seeing the care come through as fast as they want. But they're on the inside, they're frustrated because I can't provide what you need as fast as you want and need. So they have their frustrations in an incredible way, and because they care and they want to get you to the best help as fast as they can. But realize they're just another cog in a great big wheel. And they deal with it too. So I always try to level the playing field, remind people when they're mad or and understandably just so frustrated and angry with how the system is not working for them as well or quickly as it should. And they're right. I always remind us, remember the people working in that system are just as frustrated as you are.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can all start to work together to make all that a little bit better for those who need it.
I pray so, and I have hope for that. I think something will come along eventually that sets a precedent for to expedite care in certain ways, especially with repeat patients, because you already got their files, you got their work before. If they're still an addict, I bet you not so many circumstances have changed in their life, other than they're just worse off now than the last time you saw them. But the only question I had about that, the healthcare system and rehab facilities is, I mean, specifically, was there a point Zach reached where you felt that he just honestly was ready to, detox and go to rehab and try recovery and maybe like an outpatient program or something like that?
I remember 3 times, very specifically, 3 different times he tried. So excuse me, this one's a tough one for me. It's almost hard to imagine the unimaginable struggle going on in their own heart and mind. And it's important for people to know that. Like, they're trying, they're dealing with something that's got a hold of them, and they're trying so hard. They don't want to be like that. There's not an addict in the world who wants to be an addict. or having substance use disorder, or and everyone uses different terms. I use the term addict because that's the term I use.
too.
But I don't believe for a second they want to be that way. I don't. So it's an enormous struggle that in Zach's case, I know he went through, and he went into like short-term, basic detox program, which was great. It was only a week, but it was a good chance for him to clean up and restart. And he's maintained sobriety for a while to wait to get into a facility, a lot more longer-term facility. And by the time that came around, the approvals, which was weeks and weeks and weeks, he had lost the battle again. There was another time he actually went to a great program up here in Canada, in London, Ontario. And he was there for 3 months. 3 months. And then he just, for whatever reasons, he chose not to stay any longer. And the third time I remember was right before he passed. I mean, he had I don't remember how many days. I want to say 14 days. But in our world, that was super good. We were celebrating every hour, every day.
Sure.
And that he was maintaining sobriety. And then on that Friday, on the 15th of July, is when he made the choice. He was going to go hang out with a friend, and I knew what that meant because I knew who this friend was, and I knew, well, these are not the people you need to hang out with. And no, I'll be fine. I just haven't really hung out with anyone in a while, which was true because he was kind of laying low at home, trying to stay sober, wait for the program to come through. And sadly, he made that choice to go hang out with that so-called friend. And that decision turned out to be his last. But that was 3 times. 3 times. I know very clearly he really tried. And there were other times, but those 3 kind of jump out in my head. And I guess there's a 4th I remember too, when he was hospitalized and he came out after being hospitalized and going to change his life. And look, he wanted to. He didn't want to live that life. But it can be a very powerful demon that can get in their head. Yeah. But he tried several times.
What do you think it was, Stephen, that, I mean, some make it, some beat it, some don't. But what ultimately do you think was the reason why he couldn't beat it? He couldn't be one of the success stories.
I don't think we get to know that.
Mm.
I think that's where you got to really build up some grieving processes, some faith, some belief in a higher power, something bigger than yourself. I'll call it that. And everyone has what that means to them. Because that's the part we never get to know for sure. Why? Why did this person get better and turn their life around to a big success story?
I mean,
why did Zach spend 14 days sober? Why did he spend 14 days sober, have 1 day to fall out the wagon, and that's the day it stopped his heart? Right? Like you could really torment yourself, and to be full disclosure, I have. You can torment yourself into your own grave about the whys and why not, and coulda, shoulda, woulda. There comes a point we all have to learn. There's some acceptance that you don't get to know everything on this plane, and that's something I don't know why he wasn't meant to get better, or it just didn't, or it unfolded the way it did. He didn't deserve it. None of his family deserved it. He was better than that, and I know that. But alas, this one got him, and sadly, it gets many.
Yeah.
There are, not to lose hope, there are many that do recover and live wonderful lives with great stories. And thank God for that. And so I'll never really answer the question of why he wasn't to make it. Only I believe, or coming to believe, that my job is to take what happened, and if I can, it'll always be a horrible, tragic event. It'll always be the saddest thing that's ever happened to me. and to his family and friends. Uh, but if I can take this unimaginable tragedy and do something good with it, then
Yeah.
at least you're finding some purpose in it. And I had again, I have to have the faith to believe that he would be happy with that. He would be happy that I'm trying to at least do something that can help another loved one who's dealing with a parent or a family member, what have you, who's trying to care for someone in that space. And yeah, if writing the book and telling the story or speaking with people like you does that, then I think Zach would be happy about that. That we took something so terrible, and again, we don't get to change the terrible event. That's always will be the terrible event. But nonetheless, try to do something positive for others out of that. And some days I think that's the best we can do. And that helps, that helps me find a little bit of purpose from the tragedy.
You have, I mean, to turn that around into maybe making a difference in somebody else's life. I almost feel like that was an unfair question to ask you now that you answered it like that. Cause I'm like, how could anybody know? And when that grip really gets a person to the point where they know that they're not using the drugs anymore, the drugs are using them, it's too late. Like I'm just going to stop now. I'm going to wean myself off. Like it's that expectation thing again. And then, yeah, I don't think we ever get to know either. I don't think I'll ever ask that question again because there's no way to know. Where all we see is what we see from them, and the choices they make and everything like that. Like you said, 14 days, and then goes out for a little, one time to hang out.
But to ask what? But to ask why? Yeah, and like what you said, but to ask why is such a normal thing to do.
It is.
So I would never, no need to regret asking the question. Like people, we all do it. Like why? Why him? Why me? Why this? Why this situation?
Yeah.
I guess once there comes a point we have to realize we might get the answer to the why. But what our real responsibility is, what do we do now? What do we do now is key. And if we can, in time, and I be very clear on that, in time, if we can get to the point where we're not, instead of saying why me or why him or why that, get to what can I do now? If we can ask ourselves that better question, when the time is better, I think it gives us there's a hope. There's a hope in that there still can be a life beyond this. It's like something having a terrible accident and losing limbs, right? And like you can sit around a long time and go, why me? And understandably so. But we all know people have done incredible things after terrible accidents and and terrible setbacks. And there's other people that basically crawled in the corner and withered away. Yeah. And that's the choice part. In time, I wouldn't expect anyone to make the most positive choice out of the gate. But I think if you get there over some time, I think you really can start asking yourself those better questions, and you can take something so terrible, at least create some good out of it. And that's what we hope to do. I mean, that's the whole purpose of doing all this. That was the whole purpose.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the ultimate would be to never have to ask that question. I mean, that's not, possible, but yeah, instead of why, turn the why into a what now. Now what do we do with it? And I mean, some people are, that's why I don't, if I could speak for a second on something, I tried to many times before, and everybody's addiction's different drugs, different levels, different ages. Addiction's addiction though. And I tried several times before to recover anonymously and quiet and not really talk about it or anything like that. But man, my addiction didn't care if I was being seen or not, where I was at, where I was going, who said anything, none of that stuff. So I'm thinking now that's just like, well, people kind of like are really passive and they try to sneak into meetings or sneak into rehab and they become really quiet about it, and I don't think it's possible really to truly recover silently. At least it didn't work for me. I'll say it like that. It's just, the shame gets people. People easily throw things back at you.
Yeah.
And if one doesn't, I know it's hard, it's easier said than done, but I always tried to like deny certain things. I would say, yes, I did this, I did that, but all this other stuff we don't need to bring up. It's in my past, leave it alone. Deal with everything on myself. I always relied on myself, and that exhausted me. Once, a bad moment came up or something like this, an accusation, some gossip, me relying on myself always ended up with me going back out there. That's where I really learned how to just give it all up and had to surrender it, and still do meetings and still do 12 steps and do testimonies. It's a good balance. But for anybody who's not recovering without a higher power, man, I don't know how they do it. They might be stronger than I am, but I'm grateful for my weakness. And my weakness was I got tired of trying myself. That's why I do these interviews. That's why I started this group. It's because there's strength in numbers. And if a bunch of people in active addiction or recovery or recovered by God and all this stuff, it's that we all have a similar story. Somebody can relate to somebody else about something. And then it brings ownership. And then that makes this person be like, well, I heard so-and-so and Stephen talk about this, so now I can talk about it. And maybe I could, prevent my cousin or my friend, and now we're turning the whys into the what nows. And I love that answer. I'm glad I did ask that question. But if you don't ever do anything proactive after the fact, and it's just misery and heartache from there on, you're passing that on to somebody else. Somebody else is going to see you still suffering. Somebody's lost, desperation. Now they're going to be disconnected from you. So what are they going to do? They're probably going to go fill that void with something. And then it just starts the vicious cycle over and over and over. Letting go is ownership. That's what I think works for me. That's the what nows that I think people really need to start doing. And I think you've done that very well. I appreciate you letting me go on that little rant there.
Thank you. And no, not at all. You make some really good points, but I like what the word you said, surrender. And I believe I don't believe there's one path to recovery. I believe there could be many, but there are certain fundamentals that aren't. If you don't pull them in, you're skipping over. It's like doing anything well. There's fundamentals, and everyone has their own way of doing it, but there's fundamentals that need to be there. And like the surrender part, like if you said, I'm going to do it all myself, and sure enough, eventually you couldn't do it all yourself. Nope. I do believe there's a surrender part, even if to the point of just going like, okay, I can't do this on my own. Now, whatever your next step from that is, that could be different for lots of different people, and I can appreciate that. But the surrender part to go like, I can't do this on my own, huge step. And so that might come from talking to a trusted friend, going to a meeting. It could start with a phone call, something so simple, but like, okay, I'm actually putting my hand up and say, I've done everything I can in my own strength. Now I need something else. And I think it's a vital start if you want to get, and I don't, by the way, if you want to get better, and I don't profess in any way to be a recovery expert, I am not, but I have watched the process, and there are certain fundamentals that need to be there if anyone gives himself a hope, and I tell people all the time, you are not alone, you are not alone, because they got to get that in your head. As soon as you think you're alone, you're probably in trouble, and be that even if you're not dealing with addiction yourself, like if you're being the caregiver of that person, feeling like you're alone in that is not good, because you're not, but trying to pull that off alone is never a healthy thing, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work. People need those supports bigger than themselves again, and whatever that could mean to somebody, but you got to get outside it. I think it was Tony Robbins said one time, said, stay in your head and you're dead. And, I remember the first time I heard that, I thought it was a cool little phrase, But it was a long time after before when I really that hit me one day. I said, "That's really true. Stay in your head, and you're dead." Because he's talking about getting outside of yourself, something bigger than yourself, and that could start again with a trusted friend. It could be as simple as that for your start, and grow from there. So I think, I think that this, the whole surrender part is incredibly important. Incredibly important.
I mean, it's so crucial, and I know that some people don't have anybody, or they've poured out, a few times before, and have been that trust has been broken. It's like, I know there's people. I guess I'll assume this, but they go to somebody and they lay it all out there, or a lot, and it just gets thrown back on them somehow, and that's a tough one. I can almost kind of relate it to like being church hurt. Like people used to go to church and then something happened or something was said or done, and now it's like, well, and then they end up blaming God for that somehow. So God and church and all that's done. If one person, breaks that trust, that person that's in recovery or a meeting or something, then there's all recovery's bad, all meetings are bad, and they just end up completely shutting the door on all of that. But if you can find that one person, and it's a big step for them to be like, all right, I'm shaky, but I'm going to say some stuff, and it's received well, and that little flicker of healing, honest healing, can fill them a little bit. That's something to chase too. And I know even as addicts, we chase good feelings. So healing does feel good. And if you're like, holy cow, they didn't mistreat me, they're like respected me. This, okay, I don't have to be. That's a little less shame. That's a little less guilt. That's a little less resentment. That's a little more of a chance of them actually succeeding. And that's why our stories and our worst, dirtiest, darkest times and things we've done, those who turn around and they're like, here's me. Here's what I've done. It's my old life because I got this now, but now I can talk about this. What you got? You got something as bad or worse as that, or not as bad? Well, give it to me, because I already shared everything, with you. You got all my stuff. So, and I just love the way that there's no alone in connection. And I love how we just end up like, this is an interview, then we just really start having conversations. That's why I love these. I'll move on a little bit though, Stephen. That was excellent. The 4 common denominators. How crucial are they for attaining success to a progressive recovery? You spoke of the 4 common denominators.
Cool. Yeah, I did. Let me think. What were they? Remind me.
I got the book here.
Chapter.
I got to turn around to it.
I got
common denominators. Controlling, enabling, rescuing, controlling, enabling, and numbing.
Controlling, enabling.
I should have wrote them down. But those are stages.
Yeah, me too. So why I call them common denominators? Because I believe we all, once we're in the middle of dealing with someone who is in active addiction, it's almost, when I say these blanket statements, I understand there's always exceptions to the rules and not everything applies to everyone, but I'm talking in general. It's almost impossible for us not to go through those stages, because you remember control used to work. When you have a child that is younger and you put them in a timeout, something as simple as that, trying to correct some behavior issues, simple little thing. And for example, everyone might have a little thing, and everyone can talk about their own childhood when, my parents told me I got to do this or I can't do that now. And you did it, and you lived through it, and you learned your lesson, you hope, and off you went. So that's a little form of natural control, not in a bad way, just that your parents would have over you. But in time, what happens is you get older and you realize control doesn't work anymore, because you spend so much time to control their decisions, where they're going, who they're being with. And I've come to the belief that exerting control over another human being is probably one of the most biggest useless and wasteful forms of energy you can put out there. I just don't think it works. I think we control very little in our own lives outside of our own reactions, our own thoughts. our decisions. We have some control on ourselves to that extent, but there's so little we do. I think we often convince ourselves we have a way more control than we do. And I've even thought back to the last time myself and Zach spoke. What if I left my office that day and rushed home and, you know, for lack of a better term, locked them up in the house or guarded them in the house and kept them away? Would that have worked? Maybe. Would that have delayed something that day? Maybe. But that's a form of control in my own head. Oh, if I did this other thing, I could have stopped it. I could have stopped it. And so I think we all naturally go to control because we feel like it gives us some level of control, which we're dying because we feel so out of control and all this dysfunction we're surrounded with. So control is a big one. The enabling to me falls right into that too, because that's trying to that's just trying to get them to come to terms with the terms we want them to come with. Well, maybe I'll give you this time, and that way you promise you won't do that anymore. And so that's where we get caught up in that. Again, it's a very natural and easy thing to do. I think the big key is that we learn that what we're doing and try to wean ourselves off of that. I don't think anyone could run around and say, I'll never enable in any way, ever. If someone out there can, well, you're stronger than I, that's for sure, and hats off to you. But that's a tough one for people because you kind of sometimes almost want to feel like, well, I'll help you out this time from a caring place. And but at the end of the day, we all know it tends to not work and only helps the addict stay stuck quite often. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying that this whole tough love, cut them off hard thing is always the answer either, because I struggle with that one to this day. But certainly full-on enabling is something that we do need to learn to manage in our own lives and control our own decisions as opposed to trying to control theirs.
This book made me think of it had so many aha moments. It's not even funny, but what I realized, because I've had people enable me in times in different ages of my life that I don't even think they knew that they were really enabling me, and I think that's part of the level of manipulation the disease can play. When you know somebody just genuinely cares, and you still know that you're a caring person. Almost every addict is a really caring person. I don't know how many times I've heard, I'll give you the shirt off my back, and they do. Addicts care extremely, so they naturally gravitate towards others who are like themselves in that capacity, that care. And it's just easily to manipulate. But that's when the care is detrimental, and that level of sincerity is what just perpetuates it. And because, like, if a person only knows how to care, like they don't know how to, like, be manipulative or deceptive, they just care naturally. So if they see somebody in need and they don't really see the disease or even or aware of it, they're just enabling by default because that's how they are. And that's a tough one. But when you do know that you're enabling, like we see it all the time with the intervention shows and all that, the parents just let them stay in the room. They're sleeping all day. They're getting when they're running. To establish a firm no, like you said, not tough love. That's not the answer all the time too, but a firm no for the parent and the child has to try to be established at some point. How difficult is it? Did you ever establish a firm no with Zach, and how did that go? How'd that process play out?
It always goes terrible at the beginning. It's just that's not the answer they want. It's not the answer they want. So you're going to get bad, very difficult reaction to that, guaranteed. But in time, there is a such thing, and as boundaries, where people will learn, and not just in life in general. You set your boundaries and you stay firm to whatever your boundaries are. The people will learn that it's no good barking up your tree for certain things because they already know the answer is no with me. And I think it's something all of us can always get better at. And this might have nothing to do with dealing with a loved one who's in active addiction.
Sure.
But boundaries are key. I got a good friend of mine who's so good at boundaries, and it's so funny. He always tells me, we're both busy guys, and we chat when we can. We don't. We live, a few. Well, you guys got states, we got provinces, so we live a few provinces apart. But still dear friends, and his boundaries are excellent. Every time I talk to him, I feel like I'm reminded about boundaries, and and just as in friendships, because he's the type of guy, like when I'm with my family, I don't answer my calls. I will call you back when I had to drive from A to B, maybe, and I got a window of 20 minutes, and I'm going to call you back. I want to talk to you, but I'm not. And it's like, this might like see simple little examples, but the fact is, I know he's having a Friday night home with his wife, and they're having some quiet time for just themselves. I don't call him. I don't call him to invite him to somewhere. I know. Now, one time I would have, thinking, hey, we got this thing going on. Why don't you come over? But I'm like, no, because I know that's their time. Would they make sure they joke and call it their date night? And so that's cute, and that's great. But the fact is, you can see it that, like, I'm not going to call him on Friday night or invite him. Like, that quiet little boundary helps him and I have great respect for each other. And I'm not offended if I do call and he doesn't answer the phone, because I go, oh, right, it's Friday night. He's not going to get on the phone with me. So, and I think we can extrapolate that right across our entire lives. And then, but the opposite is also true though, Trav. If you don't set them, I guarantee you have someone in active addiction that you're really trying to love and do everything you can for, as you should. You will really get taken down a really, really challenging path, and you're not helping yourself, and you're certainly not helping them. So, again, I'm not preaching that I have it all right and got it all figured out, but I've certainly learned that to be true. I definitely could always get better at boundaries. I think we all can, but I think they're super important, super, super important that you start. And you just start with something, and if you say no, just mean no. You don't need to explain. You don't need to apologize. Just, I love you, but the answer is no.
And I do
that, and that's it, and stop.
Yeah.
Right.
Because there'll be, like you said in the beginning, there'll be they don't expect it for one. Their disease won't let them expect it, but then all of a sudden they got a million different whys. Why would you do that? I'm just going to do this. The threats come, the accusations come. I mean, that's a tough balancing act. I know there's probably been some cases where parents just lock their doors and turn off all communications and let the streets, handle them and all this. And then, then they get the phone call or the knock at the door. And I can't imagine that world either. I mean, there's just so many facets to it. Like, it's hard to say that you got to, find the balance. But I mean, you have to start looking at yourself.
And every journey is so different.
It is. It has to be. I mean, if one answer was the answer, then I mean we probably wouldn't be in the mess that we're in. In some of these circumstances.
Sure.
I wanted to ask. This is just like a question I came up with. I didn't think it wasn't really based on the book, but say towards maybe the middle of this addiction, once you started maybe saying no and enabling, died down some and your boundaries were set. How was your faith during all this? Like the early stages, I guess too, but how much of a role did your faith start playing on this? I mean, was there a back and forth with God, a blame game, or was there any at all?
It definitely played a role. In one chapter of the book, I wrote about creating space, and in that, I'd be writing, journaling. I'd be doing a little bit of exercise, basically doing healthy things for my body and mind. And I would get up at 5 a.m. because I knew he always woke between 7 and 7:30 a.m. Without fail, no matter what happened the day before, between 7 and 7:30 a.m. he was awake. And so I realized I could get a full 2 hours of taking care of myself. And that was helping relieve stress, plan my day a little better, just get off to a better start. In that, I actually started meditating, and I had a couple of YouTube meditation things I would listen to, just pop my earphones in and sit on the edge of my bed, and it would really calm me and help me settle my mind. But in that, I can't even say it's planned. I mean, I grew up going to a Pentecostal church, and so I've always had faith, and and consider myself a Christian. But from all of that, I think I just started to settle kind of into quiet prayers. It kind of just morphed in there. This wasn't a plan, and I guess my faith grew because as I went through those processes, I actually felt better. So I started to believe this works. I started to see in my own life, and the simplest thing, like if the rest of my day could be stressful, busy, chaotic, what have you, or maybe he could be in a really bad way that day. In those moments, everything was okay. In the moment, it did mean that in an hour's time, some things could be challenging, but in those moments, everything was okay, and that's where I certainly really built up the belief in the higher power again, but in a real way. What I mean by that is not just something you logically believe in or were taught when you grew up and all those typical things. I started to feel something in a real way, that there was something bigger than myself. I tried to be completely honest. I wasn't even that even concerned about what level it was or what was all supposed to mean or even what I called it. I just knew there was something bigger than myself that was there, and I knew it was helping. And so I guess that's how my faith grew, in that, from real, in the smallest of ways, but real stacked experiences. And I was dealing with it better. I was still making a ton of mistakes every day. I didn't get all the enabling right, and I didn't get all those things. I made mistakes on every bit of it, maybe more than most. I don't know. But I can certainly tell you I got better, and I got better, and I got better. And there was a point that I guarantee you, when he was talking about doing something I knew would be unhealthy for him, I would be there. I mean, listen, I'm the guy who paid off drug dealers. I'm the guy who rescued him from every horrible situation, or tried to. I'm the guy who fell for it all and tried to do it all and going to save them all, right? So I made all the mistakes. I'm a bit really clear that, but over time, I didn't control as much. Did I still try it sometimes? Probably, in desperation, but I didn't control as much. I certainly didn't enable as much. And I wrote in the book, it's like I kind of clue up things that more say, like, move towards this. Don't expect to go to perfection. You're never getting there. It's a highlight reel. It ain't really ever going to happen. But you can improve. And those small improvements that you stack day after day after day, eventually you can say, hey, I'm doing a decent job of this. Perfect? Probably never. But a decent job. And if you're doing a way better job now than you were 6 months ago, well, that's progress. And progress really can lead to some happiness despite the challenge. So, yeah, so that's in putting that process in place certainly strengthened my whole faith that way. And listen, this day I still try to be grateful for something, and that's another little practice I put in place way back then. And to this day, there's a lot of that I've never let go. Just no matter what's going on, there's still something you can be grateful for. And I really believe that. And I think that perspective has helped keep me healthy, mentally and emotionally and all those things, despite tragedy. Not without its imperfections, and I have my hours of days, and I suspect I always will. But I believe I can move forward, and I can move forward in a healthy way, and I believe others can too from those same processes. So faith's a big thing. I'll always be a big believer, something bigger than us, and we could really rely on it if we choose.
I really appreciate you sharing that. That was very well put. Let's talk about self-blame. It happens, I think, almost 100% of the time in these situations. We assume someone else's problems are somehow our fault. We begin to fake, responsibility, set out to fix the problems, as you kind of alluded to. But it leads to creating excuses for them as well. How can we, as parents, avoid that self-deceptive practice of self-blame?
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah,
I
I
have an
circled it.
extended family member who, yeah, I have an extended family member who sadly has a child who's not in a good space, addiction wise. And when they reached out to me, this goes back a while now, when they first started reaching out to me, to just to have someone discuss it with, and hoping for a little bit of insight maybe, and just some support, and happy to do it, of course. And but the self blame was, as I say, it was on 10 at the time. It was just like, and what the inspiration really came for that chapter, all based around the blame game, I think I call it, was that shortly after I went public with my story, a few months after it passed, I did a TV show, and I just talked about it. And then I was hit with an absolute tsunami of emails and phone calls and people coming into my office, and it was a lot, like way more than I ever expected as a response, we'll say.
I
And
would imagine.
without fail, someone said a version of, oh, once they felt they could open up to me because, oh, you understand, here's my story. In their arc of their story, I'm not kidding you, without fail, it was always said, I don't know what I did for him or her to end up like this. I don't know what I did. I'm not sure how I failed them. I don't. And I heard that in their own words, but that phrase every single time. It went like, everyone thinks it's their fault. It's the first place they go. And then in hindsight, I could look back like I did the same thing. When I first started seeing a therapist to try to learn processes to how, literally trying to learn a process, how do I fix him? That was actually why I went. Now, my therapist was far smarter than I, and eventually helped me learn that, no, your job is not to fix him. Your job is to be the best you can be, and the support for him when he's ready to get better. Huge distinction. But I didn't know that. But I had so self-blamed myself. If it's my fault, and therefore something I can fix. And again, I think it's a little bit of a natural thing that we as loved ones can go to. But it's completely detrimental. It'll keep you emotionally stuck forever. And guess what? Chances are there's nothing you did that caused them down this path. And if the rare case you actually really believe it to be true, you did something to set them on a bad path, then go deal with it. You need to go deal with that so you can get past sitting around blaming yourself. Right or wrong, it's a waste of time. It'll serve to keep you emotionally stuck. And to be absolutely no help, especially to yourself or the loved ones you're trying to care for. So I understand why people do it. It's a very easy go-to, but you've got to do the work. It's so important that you do the work to help you learn how to come out of that. Because spending your time blaming yourself and beating up on yourself for all the mistakes you could have possibly made that could have possibly turned this corner, it's just a waste of your emotional energy. And really, it doesn't serve to help either of you. So just when you look at it that way, what is the point of doing anyway? Even if you're right. Okay. I said to Zach was upset with me, and I said, Zach, okay, let's agree that everything that's wrong with your life is my fault. Let's us agree. I said, now, are either of our lives better right now? No. Right? Like, we haven't moved one step forward. So spending time sourcing out and finding blame in yourself is just, I hate to be harsh, but I would remind you, it's a pretty useless thing to do. You haven't helped the person you're trying to help at all. So I always encourage people to try to arrest that thought and work through it, and just keep doing the work, so you can finally come out of that self-blame. So, Don't do that to yourself. It's cruel and it's unfair to you very much, and doesn't help anyone.
Well, there's a part about the suffering. This doesn't get any easier, but the perpetual suffering. With some of your son's pain, I mean, obviously he went through some pain. Probably different kinds, multiple levels.
Mm.
Does some of his pain become your own, and could you tell the difference at a certain point?
No, good question. I think it's natural as parents, especially, that your child hurts, you hurt. I don't think you get to separate the two. So, as much as he hurt, I know I hurt with him. And that's not to make me any kind of martyr or any at all.
No.
It's but again, I refer to this in the book. Like I'm not saying it's possible to end all suffering. Wouldn't that be ideal? But I think we can ease it on ourselves, and I think that's the goal, because I think it would be almost inhuman if they're hurting, you wouldn't hurt. I wouldn't dare tell someone, "Don't hurt. You shouldn't hurt about that." Well, if they're hurting, you're hurting, and I think that's the normal part of it. But I think there's a healthy way to start working with that, and I don't think if their choices continue to be poor for themselves, or the addiction takes complete control, and maybe the choices aren't even their own anymore. If that suffering in their own lives continues, I think my point I was trying to make in the book was like, it doesn't mean you had to perpetually suffer too forever. You know, yes, you're not going to get away with it completely. They hurt, you hurt, understandable and human. But I do think there's a way to still move your life forward if you're willing to do the work, despite their choices. And that's what I've always tried to encourage the parents and loved ones to do, to be able to move forward despite their choices, if their choices are still, we'll say, poor and unhealthy for them. And that's how you start to move beyond perpetual suffering. Because you can stay in it forever. No problem. You can stay in it forever. You have to actually make the effort. You say, no, I'm going to start moving forward despite the choices if they're still making poor choices. And then hope in time they're going to, not all hope is lost. I mean, hope in time they're going to make some better choices. And then you'll be in a better place to support them too, which is key, right? So, yeah, and I think that's very important. We got to try to move beyond it to the level of what we can. Again, it's not about perfection. And always remembering that you're hurting because they're hurting. That's normal.
Well,
but there's a difference between hurting because they're hurting and being in perpetual suffering.
Yeah, my wife brought up a point, and this could be very delicate, and I feel like I want to mention this, or at least try to ask it, but it could be an unfair question. But she brought up the fact that his pain and your pains that you've seen that was caused from his addiction and situation, we're definitely different. But she was bringing up the point that he got to escape his from time to time by going to the drugs and whatnot. I mean, that's a lot of addicts are like, man, I gotta numb out, I gotta escape. The parent or the person that loves the addict, I mean, you got up a little bit early in the morning, did some meditating or whatever, but I mean, the pain was still there. And every time that the addict escapes their pain, the loved one, theirs is doubled, and they don't get they just have to deal with it. I mean, was there any levels of resentment that ever grew because of that? And I know that's a tough question. You can pass on that one if you want to.
No, it's a fair question and a really good question, and it does certainly thought provoking. It makes it very thought provoking for me because, I mean, my goodness, I was no saint. I've reminded people many a times that I think I did everything wrong at least few times before I did anything right. So
Okay.
there's you sometimes in your anger and your call it frustration, that could come out a lot when just your frustration of trying to fight this terrible thing and try to get them to get on a better path. I think there's times you could be resentful at the whole thing, but I think what you're really so definitely answer your question is the resentment, yes. But again, I could say this in hindsight: the resentment was what was happening. It wasn't at him directly. It was I resented every drug dealer who took advantage of his vulnerabilities. I resented that this young man had such a great personality, had fun, and we were so close. I resented when he could say those mean things to me. And I know all of them tried to manipulate me and to give into demands and things like that. I resented that because I hated that. Because I didn't believe that's who he was. I knew who he really was. And I wanted that back. And I resented the fact that that was going away. So resentment was certainly something I felt plenty of times. But I wouldn't say it was direct. I wasn't resenting Zach. I was resenting the situation. Yeah. So your wife brings up a very good point. Yeah. Well thought out for sure. But yeah, I would say that's how I would frame that.
How difficult is forgiveness? How do you know it's been granted or accepted? Is that still something in progress?
You know something? I think forgiveness is way easier than people make it out to be. Because once you get in the habit of doing it and doing it for the reason that knowing that you're doing it for you, it actually becomes quite rewarding. You only have trouble forgiving something because you're holding on waiting for someone to get some blame and somehow you're going to get some reward. Forgiveness is for yourself first, always. And what was the expression I heard? It's probably cliche. Maybe it's heard of it. I heard it a couple of years ago and it hit me like maybe lots of people heard it before. I hadn't. And, it's like holding on to, like not forgiving somebody, basically holding on for this blame to come, and they're going to get theirs because they did me wrong. And that it's like you drinking poison and hoping they're going to get sick. And that hit me so hard. It's like, well, that is so true. Like, because that person's moved on their lives. I'm not even coming in their head. They're not thinking about me, and I'm going around all day thinking about them, how they got it coming to them, and karma's going to come get them. And I think, what a waste of time. And I really, again, with all my imperfections and shortcomings, I really keep forgiveness as a part of my life. I know I won't be everyone's cup of tea. I had someone truly just recently, I don't know them, they messaged me on my Facebook page, and they didn't like something I wrote. And they told me exactly why.
Oh, wow.
So what do I do? Do I get mad at that person? Do I carry, that's okay. You're your own person. You can agree what books you want to read and don't want to read. And that's okay. And I just look at it like I feel nothing about that when it comes to any kind of resentment or anger. I'm just like, okay, maybe I learned something from that. Right? Maybe I just learned that I'm not for everyone. And maybe that's all the good Lord wanted to teach me that day. And but I think forgiveness can be a way easier than we make it if we realize what we're really gaining from it. You realize it's a gift you're giving to yourself. And once you really start to do that, forgiveness becomes actually kind of something you should probably actually look forward to doing more so than I must do this because it's the right thing to do. So yeah. Maybe that's not a non-typical answer, but that is what the belief I've come to through my own experience.
Well, I like that, and I mean, I believe it goes back to, for me, the thing with the surrendering, and I'm only ever trying to speak from my personal experience and what I've witnessed and felt. I've spoken before about, the surrendering leads to everything else. To me, it's I don't even know if a person necessarily has to have a deep level of faith before they turn to God, because He knows what level we're at, every person with their faith. But when that moment when you really just, and it could be, I mean, in all honesty, I believe it could be even in a negative sense, like, like lashing out because he's being recognized. You're not going to some other idol or some website or something else. I mean, you're acknowledging God. So even if you're blaming him falsely for something, you're throwing everything to him, and he already knows that. And the forgiveness part of it, for me, like I spoke a while back, because this is things I've learned almost with every interview and testimony. It's like I always learn something from people, and I'm like, forgiveness. I don't know how to forgive myself for certain things I've done. Stealing money from my grandma to buy Coke and stuff when I was living at her house because I had nowhere else to go. You talk about enabling. I mean, how do I forgive myself for that? People, I'm like, they must say that and not really mean it, because there's no way. Like, how could a person forgive themselves for doing certain things? They seem unforgivable. And the thing that I realized was like, oh, well, God forgives. So if God forgives me and I'm still able to get to heaven because his son died for my sins, wow, that's a pretty forgivable thing. So that helped me. It was to realize that, like, oh, silly little human me, in my mind, I can't forgive myself. Well, it's not up to me to forgive myself. If God's forgiven me of my sins, that is one he's already forgiven me for. So it made it easier and more rational, to be honest with you. And that just started steamrolling things. I'm like, okay, I regret things I've done. I know the things that are shameful and all this stuff and regrettable, but I have to go to God for that forgiveness. I can't go around being like, hey, everybody, I forgave myself for all the stuff I've done. It's okay. Like, it doesn't even make sense. And I mean, it's just, so when years before, when I've heard other people say this, I'm like, what do you mean? Like, there's, like, I know some things you've done. You just forgive yourself for that. It has to come from a higher power. And then that's when the healing starts. And it's just an important thing for me, because this is all stuff my little ego mind like thought I knew so much about everything. And then once I got to that weak moment, which was the ultimate surrender, which brings ultimate strength, I'm like, oh, I don't really have to know anything or even think that I do, because God knows me and knows everything and knows how. I mean, it's almost embarrassing sometimes. I'm like, oh man, well, God sees it all. So, but it's forgiveness that leads to everything else. I just think it's key. I mean, I just love, like, I'm 47 and I'm just like, I feel like I'm just learning some like life lessons, and it's spiritual and it's above, other things that I just see on a daily basis. But
Yeah.
it went on another. I do this once in a while. I bet my wife.
And you'll keep learning.
Huh?
I said, but and you'll keep learning. We all do. I mean, that's growing. We should always be learning something if we're listening and allow ourselves to be teachable. So, yeah, that's like, listen, if we spoke in 12 months' time, I bet you'd tell me some more distinctions you figured out.
I bet you.
I'm just learning this. Right?
Yeah, I will.
So,
let me talk about.
That's the journey. That's the journey.
I mean, I look forward to it every day. There's just somebody new comes along. I learn from something wrong. I mean, it's just surrendering has given me the life I've always wanted and so much more, but with substance, and it's just awesome. So let me get back on track. Past guilts, our past guilts. Can they be used by someone in active addiction? Like somebody that has something on you or knows some things about you, like I was saying, like how easy is it for an addict to use our past guilts to their advantage?
Well, if they're aware of something that you feel is a shortcoming in yourself, in their desperation, and I won't ever make them sound like they're mean people. Never, being desperate and being mean are two separate things. In their desperation, sometimes they use that as a tool to get you to succumb to their demands or whatever they might be at that time. And I mean, I know myself and Zach love each other deeply, and we were very close. Yet in his active addiction, he said some of the meanest things to me in the moment. And oh, that time when I was a kid and you did this, and I'm sitting there, I didn't do that. Like what did I do that? And that's your own guilt and your own not feeling good enough. And so and I know now, and I didn't know at the time completely, but I certainly know now that that's just part of the process. These are the things that, after talking to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in all different walks of life, uh, they all tell their own stories. I'm like, oh yeah, they said that to me too, or they use this one, and I realized it is as a part of the tactic. So I think that can happen. So I think the best we can do on that one is forgiving, or going back to forgiveness. You're forgiving yourselves and accepting that, yeah, I made mistakes for sure. I certainly didn't make a mistake with intent of hurting you as my loved one, but if it did, I'm sorry. But it doesn't mean you can use that against me. You know what I mean? There's a difference. So
Right.
I think as we learn to forgive ourselves and not self-blame, or at least self-blame less as time goes on, I think it makes us stronger to deal with. If a tactic, I'll call it, comes at you like that, you're in a much better position to process and deal with that properly. Because if you haven't forgiven yourself, you're still living in self-blame and it's all my fault sort of stuff, you're going to fall for every tactic, because you're not strong enough. And so, I mean, I think we all can agree that won't work. That is not a helpful thing. So again, it just goes back to the importance of learning to forgive yourself, because we all have shortcomings. We all didn't get it right. There's no perfect parent out there, not a one.
No.
So we're all in the same boat. We just got to do the best we can as we learn to get better. You know better and you do better. And I think that's an ongoing process for all of us, but a very important one.
Sure. Applying outdated methods to a contemporary problem, and we're talking about acceptance, or that described as denial. How long did your denials last, and how did you finally reach acceptance? And that's acceptance on many different levels.
Yeah, I think I got beaten into acceptance. I think it just enough kept not all my strategies that were ineffective. I think eventually you just finally get to the point like nothing I'm doing is working. That kind of throw your hands up in the air sort of feeling. And I don't know. For me, there certainly wasn't a day I woke up, oh, I accept. But there was a point somewhere in it, like someone could ask me, I wouldn't be proud of it, and I'd be very sad to say it. But if it was someone didn't mind acknowledging it too, per se. Someone said, how's Zach doing? I said, well, my Zach, Zach is in full on addiction. Like he's really having trouble with drugs and he's using every day. Like there came a point I could say that in the right circles.
Okay.
And that was obviously now. I don't know if I couldn't even label it then, acceptance at the time. In hindsight, look at that's when I started gradually. There was the acceptance was coming in for me. I think because the fact is I could call it what it was. I could use the phrase, I'm sad. Like I could never use that. I would say, how do you feel? Well, I'm just sad. I'm sad he's like this. I'm sad drugs got a hold of him, and in all those processes, using those phrases, start to be able to say it out loud. This is what it is. So somewhere in there, I crept into acceptance, probably kicking and screaming in a lot of ways, because no one wants to. It's not something you want to accept, but you realize if you don't, you have zero chance of ever learning to live with it or being a healthy support for them or whatever in your life comes along. So I certainly had a messy path to it, and I wouldn't dare sit here and advise anyone how to get there. But I only to say, try and acknowledge what it is. And as they say, sweeping it under the rug is not going to help it. So I'm not saying label it, but just accept what you're feeling, accept what's going on. It'll certainly position you to have a better chance of being the healthy support and being at your best if they ever come and need you to be that person for them.
Um, Creating space to self-care. How important is it to create space, as you talked about some earlier, and apply self-care? Because we're trying to take care and fix and solve problems, but I don't
Yeah.
think self-care just gets forgotten about. And
Yeah. We're so enamored with everything else around outside of ourselves that we lose ourselves. Or it's very easy to lose ourselves. I think it's so important. I think it's paramount. If you don't, if you can't, if you can't have self love, self care, how do you expect to give it to someone else? You know the old adage, trying to give away something you don't have. But like the doctor, when I got unwell during a season when Zach was really in a bad way, and I got physically unwell, and
that's my next question.
it's like they said to me, yeah, okay, and sorry if I'm hijacking the question, but
Okay.
so I said that the doctor said to me, he said, like, the path you're on. So he was talking to me. He said, I'm not talking to your son right now. So I'm talking to you. He said, the path you're on, I'm paraphrasing, of course. He said, you're either going to end up in a hospital bed at best or in the grave at worst. He said, so you tell me, he said, which of those can you best help your son from? Obviously, I can't help them from either. That's the worst place to be. I can't help them from either of those positions. He said, you're in here trying to help your son. Oh, what are you going to do to save your son? What are you going to do? And you're falling apart in the process. He said, so that's when it really struck home that if I don't take care of myself, I'm not going to be around to take care of him in case he ever comes around and wants to get better and needs the support. And that remained with me. So I would say self-care is paramount. And everyone has their own version of that. And I'm not here to tell anyone these are the steps. But everyone finds their own self-care that works for them. And I'm talking about all of it, mental, emotional, physical, like all of it. Like you gotta, and I don't, and not in a way to be fanatical about or some perfectionist rules around that. Just in general, like you try to keep yourself in a good space. Like, what are you watching on TV? What are you reading? Are you reading good things? Are you filling your mind with good things? Like, do you ever walk? Do you ever, get the sun on your face? Do you ever, like, it doesn't have to be this elaborate routine, but just like, what are you doing for you? That maybe you start your day and say, okay, I'm good. This day could be crazy, but the first hour of this day is going to be mine and it's going to be good. These are things you can do. I was on a podcast recently. And it was actually funny because the guy's a stand-up comedian who hosts his podcast, hilarious guy. But we got into that. He says, like, you can walk, can't you? Most people can walk. He said, even those that can't walk, there's still things they can do. He said, self-care. We were talking about that. He said, you can go for a walk. That's it. Maybe get up 10 minutes earlier and walk for 10 minutes in peace. And we broke it down to such simple things. We're like, yeah, that's the whole point of self-care. What are you feeding yourself? And that can go right across the board. Again, I'm not talking to someone that has some fanatical routine and regimen or anything like that. But maybe I'm overstating the point of how important I think I made the point how important I think self-care is.
No, I think
you got to make time for you.
Points. I mean, some people go to the gym, journal, Bible. I mean, anything that makes you feel good in a healthy way, healthy habits is what I think you're talking about. Because, I mean, God forbid, and I know there's probably, I don't know of any specifically, but I'm sure there's been situations and are probably happening right now somewhere in the country where, a loved one's addiction is going to send the other person to the grave before their addiction takes them there. The stress can be incredible. And you wouldn't think that it could get any more tragic, but I know that's happened. I mean, to say it hasn't happened would be crazy, but how sad is that to have a parent or something just be so stressed out or looking at the phone or looking to see if somebody's going to knock on the door 24 hours a day. And there's no self-care. There's no thought of self-care. There's what's he or she going to do today? What are they going to ask? Where they want me to go? Where they at? Where they coming home? Yeah. It's been 5 days. And it's just, it's like putting the pedal to the floor and never releasing it. The heart can't take that. I mean, I think that's even more sad. And then that wouldn't even be something that would stop an addict. Addiction doesn't care about none of that. If anything, that's going to be another reason or excuse for the addict to keep on keeping his pedal or her pedal to the floor. Yeah, I mean, a person's addiction causes so much more pain, I think, for the loved ones than it does the addict themselves. And that's just me speaking personally. When I was doing what I was doing, I mean, I got myself in circumstances and situations, and it is what it is. And financially, it's bad, and that's still to come. But the disappointment, the letdown, the heartache, the aloneness that I left my wife in, like that's tough, and that's still like those levels of forgiveness that are still. I don't know how to forgive myself on that, so I have to take that somewhere other than just myself. But it's just like, my addiction caused way more pain for the people that I loved than it caused for me personally. And that is almost the most selfish thing about it, and the most self-deceptive thing, that I'm only hurting me, and it's just me, and you don't know me, and it's just,
Right.
Yeah, self-care is important, everybody. We got to want a little thing there, but it's just the realization never stops, and to deny myself thinking that, it's like, well, you don't want to live in your past, you gotta let that go. There's some things I do want to be reminded of, like, oh, that drink and that euphoric remembering of like a certain fun night or something, or a good feeling or a good party isn't worth what I left my family in. If that's more important than the welfare of my family, well, then I might as well go back out there. And it just isn't. And you can't see it until you're removed from it. So
and you're right. And the past is the powerful thing about the past is that it's you could learn from it. I mean, to me, the past is really for two things that's all I've come up with so far, is for cherished memories. We all got those cherished memories we always want to keep in our mind. And it's for what you can learn from it. The rest of it, I think, just serves to bog us down and drag us back. But if we can learn from it and we keep our cherished memories from it, I think the rest of the past is just, we'll leave that where it is, where it belongs, and indeed where it is in the past. So,
yeah, the people, places, and things thing. Like, I live in a small town, and I DoorDash. Like, I'll see places and stuff and run into people all the time, and it's just like, is that going to be triggering for me in a sense that, I'll miss that, I'm going to go back to it, or does it immediately remind me of the wreckage and damage that my addiction caused in those places with those people and doing those things? And that's the major difference now, is that when I go somewhere or see a certain house or whatever, maybe even hear a certain old song, it constantly puts them in their faces first, the looks of disappointment and betrayal on their faces. There's no high that I'm going to go seek that would erase that. It's just, I'm just grateful I got past the point of being like, well, I need something. I need them to heal. I need them to be better. And the only chance at that is for me to stay the course that I'm on. That is my number one thing. I'm not trying to go out there and get pats on the back or validation or justification or like, hey, you're doing goods, I'm proud of you. So I don't want any of that stuff. I want the people that I love, that love me, that have loved me through everything, to know that I'm getting better because I'm letting God make me better. And the chances of me going back to any of that stuff become less every day. This is the reason why I sit down with people like you. This is the reason why I got that group. And if you don't feel the void of the time that you do the drugs and try to get them and all this other stuff, if you don't fill that with something positive, like this is just a perpetual state of self-care, then that's a lot of idle time, and that's never, it never leads to anywhere good.
Yeah.
I'm near the end. I think I got 34 questions. I'm getting close. It's not too bad. Practice gratitude. How does that ease suffering?
I think it's hard to suffer and be grateful at the same time. I mean, just try it. It's actually kind of hard to do. So, yeah, that was a short answer, but that's really how I. And again, if I've written it in a book, it's because that's what I experienced, right? That's what I experienced, so that's what I believe on that front.
I like that. I mean, there's plenty of things we can complain about and miss and commiserate over, but yeah, I mean, if you don't start your day off with some form of gratitude, even just feet hitting the floor, chances are it's going to be a tough day. If you don't have something to be grateful for, then all that's left is pain and misery. So, yeah. Now I just got a few.
We live in such a rich. Go ahead.
We live in such a rich what?
Oh, I'm sorry. We live in such a rich part of the world. Is that like we got something to be grateful for? That's like, you got a fridge in your house with food in it. Like you realize that puts you in the top. Probably, I don't know. There was a stat I read once, but it was incredible that it was, most people didn't even have that. And so being grateful for something, despite, again, not taking away that you're having challenges with things, or not to downplaying that at all, but there's always something to be grateful for, despite all. It just is. And again, you want to ease suffering, spend some time in gratitude.
Yeah. Stephen, I predicted we'd go about an hour 40. We're at an hour 42. There's been a few people that's been with us from the beginning. There's a few others that have just joined us halfway through and whatnot. And we started off the conversation talking about July 15th, 2022, and what that day represented. If you could just elaborate a little bit more on that again. And then I had some thoughts I wanted to give you about the goodbye letter and what your thoughts and what your heart was feeling when you wrote that, and if you'd like to talk about that at all.
Okay, so on the recap, on the date of July 15th, 2022, that's the day my son Zachary overdosed and died. I found out on the next day, because obviously first he didn't turn up where we thought he would turn up, and so he was missing. It was the next day, July 16th, around just after 2 p.m. in the afternoon, that the police came to my door and gave the terrible news. And so that's what led us on this journey, well, to be even sitting here today chatting with you, of writing the book, telling the story in the hopes to help others who are dealing with either a loved one who's in active addiction, or even those who sadly their journey has ended, and you're trying to live a life beyond having a loved one involved in active addiction. And and that's kind of what brings us here today. And then you write a book, and then, well, as you just alluded to, towards the end of the book, I did write a goodbye letter to Zach.
Would you mind if I showed the picture of you got in the book? This is his son here.
No,
that's Zach.
Yeah, there he is. Yeah.
Just wanted, I'm always, faces to names and stuff, but yeah, the goodbye letter. I right before you get into this, man, I I came in the room and told my wife, I was like, this guy wrote a goodbye letter to his son, and I remember messaging you about it and stuff, and I read it out loud to her, and it was I choked up a few times because obviously nobody's going to be able to read something like that unless it makes them think of their own child, and whether they're in addiction or not, it pulls at the heartstrings and it brings everything to the ground in a good way. But I just wanted to give my respects to you for putting that in the book. I thought that was so personal that you could have left it out and nobody would have known. Nobody would have given you any slack for it. But you included it, and I thought it wrapped up this entire journey with this book just so well. So yeah, your thoughts, mindset, writing that, and ultimately why you decided to include it in the book.
When I wrote the book, one of my promises to myself was, I'm not going to do this unless it's real, it's authentic, vulnerable. I'm not gonna. I didn't want to be a puff piece. I didn't want to be sensationalized. I mean, I could have wrote chapters about horror stories, terrible things that happened, and they would have made for a dramatic read. But it was never my purpose. I knew what my purpose was, to hopefully help others in similar situations. Here's my experience. I hope it can help you. Maybe, and that was really, as not to oversimplify, but it was probably that straightforward. And I believe to do that, the book had to be real. Here's the real thing. And when I wrote that goodbye letter, I still remember it was a Saturday morning. The manuscript had already been to the editor and had some work done in small edits, we'll say. And while it was, she had it for a little bit, I remember I emailed her and said, send it back. There's more I got to add. Before you continue editing, there's more I got to add. Because I just felt like that piece was missing. And another big part of that, I was so determined that I didn't want the whole book from cover to cover to be just talking about my son was an addict. So that's part of the true story that happened, of course, as we know. I wanted to know there was a real great young man who did most of his life great things, wonderful things. He was only an addict for the final season of his life. I'm sorry if I get choked up. But
right there with you, Steve.
So I needed the world to know that he was so much more than that. And so I thought writing it, which was 100% the hardest thing I ever wrote, but of all things I wrote in the book, they were all challenging to get on paper, of course, but that was definitely the most challenging and the most emotional. But I just felt when it was on paper, and yeah, it was vulnerable, and I was scared for people to read it. It's a lot to put out there for sure, as you mentioned. But I just wanted people to know that was only a part of his life, the last season, and that he was so much more than that. And I wanted to know that for all those loved ones dealing with that you, what we lost, what it's like to lose, what it feels like, and what we got to live with. And I think the other thing that did, if you read that, this has come from someone who's not a professional therapist or a rehabilitation expert or anything, healthcare professional, whatnot. This is a real person who lived it, and this is, and I feel that's why the book has connected with so many, and I'm grateful for that, because they knew, if nothing else. Yeah, and I said this: if only one person read it, then they'll know that was real and authentic what I wrote, and that was the importance of writing it. And the goodbye letter itself, through some grief counseling, that's where I kind of learned and heard about that, and I can tell you, I think it's a valuable practice. Not everyone's got to make it public. It's really meant for you. I chose to, but I think it's a really healthy practice in the right time to do that.
I believe so
because
too.
you might be surprised how much you're repressing and whatnot, So yeah, so I know it was a lot. It was heavy, but it was real, and I think it was necessary. And I believe it really, in all the talk of what we could learn and addiction and all those things we talk about through the book, I think it stopped everyone in the moment. Go, hold on now. This was a young man full of promise and loved by many with a smile and a laugh that would light up a room. Let's not forget that was most of his life. And I think the goodbye letters, therapeutic as it was for me, I think really made sure that was brought home to the reader as well. Let's remember. And I really hope that the other parents and loved ones going through it can see that, like, yeah, you're not alone. We get it. That's how I feel too. Because I believe so many could write that same letter in their own words. I believe so many could.
Yeah.
And I think it would be just as moving and valuable to them. I really believe that. So I thought that was just a really, and it was really, when I say last minute, not that I hurried it, but like I said, the manuscript was out there and I got it sent back to me so I could add that. And I felt that just tied it all up to say, that's the entire picture. So as difficult as it was, I'm glad that I did get it become part of the book for sure.
I'm absolutely, yeah. The book was, if it wasn't there, I wouldn't have thought nothing of it. I wouldn't have known. But it was just, it really capped everything off and tied it perfectly because, yeah, it was his addiction, this and this, and but we got to see what he meant to you overall and before the addiction and through it and everything else and some good moments of what was. But it was the most emotional thing that I think I've really ever read, aside from like some letters from my wife. But yeah, it was incredible. And I think people would benefit from doing some, for themselves. Yeah, it's definitely therapeutic. It's almost like had the manuscript sent back to do a couple edits. So it's almost like it was meant to be in there. The timing of it and everything.
I think so. Yeah. I think so.
Strange how things work like that. But life of value.
Very much.
Life of value. Zach left some things better than he found them. Zach did that. That was like something he was known for. This is I want to show everybody. This is the book right here. This thing, and let me say thank you for sending this. And that's why we delayed the.
You're welcome.
Delayed the interview because I was like, well, I want to read the book. I don't want to be somebody to just ask questions. Or like, this is what it was all about. And I feel like when I sat down and started reading the book, and I started reading a little bit. I got to like 30 pages, and I was like, wait a minute, I gotta like write these questions as I'm reading them. And I sit down, and it just they float out. It was kind of incredible because I've never done nothing like this. I just usually get somebody's bio, a little bit of their background, and then just write my questions. They give their testimony, and it kind of takes care of itself. So this is the first time I've ever done, I call it a formal interview, but I can't thank you enough. That's about all the questions I had. I just want to ask final thoughts and anything you want to say to viewers, any advice you want to give or whatnot. And I always ask the guests if they want to in the interview in prayer if they want to lead, or if not, then I would. But I always got to end these in prayer. So.
Yeah. And it's your show, so I'll certainly allow you to do that. And on final thoughts, it was the book. It's a tough story. It is meant to be a book of hope as well, that there is life beyond, and you can have a happy, joy-filled, successful life despite bad things happening to good people. And I want people to really know that. And again, and I'll reiterate, the goal right from the beginning, if we could help just one, then it was well worth the endeavor. So I thank you for your time, and thanks for having me on and having such great questions, and I really, really appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, it was an honor. There's plenty of other people. Your honesty and boldness in writing a book has helped. I'm sure. I am one of those for sure. I thank you definitely for your time. It feels like we've had the schedule forever, and you finally did it on International Overdose Awareness Day, August 31st. I mean, that was very, very ironic. I don't really believe in coincidences anymore, but I'll take us out in prayer. Stephen L Randell, everybody.
Yeah.
Please check this book out. If one other person in the group can read this and let me know I'm not the only one who felt this book, and also got a lot of ideas on how to like deal with my own issues still, and how to proceed and trying to re-strengthen, reestablish a relationship with my oldest son. It's just very motivating and uplifting, and that's the part of pain. Sometimes we come out the better people on the other side of it sometimes. But thank you again, Stephen. I'll take us out in prayer. And we kept it under 2 hours, so my wife will be happy with me. Lord, thank you for this time I've gotten to, you've given us to speak with Stephen, sharing his story, an incredible story with his son, Zach, and his circumstances, Lord. And thank you for giving him the words to write in this amazing book that I think has just reached so many and helped so many people dealing with similar situations all throughout the country and world, Lord. Thank you for placing me in this position to heal some more and to benefit from other people's pain and stories and connecting and building the God network. And I give all the glory to you, Lord. And please be with everybody that's on this cast tonight and help them heal, and continue to heal, and come to you for everything else, Lord, and give you all the glory. Thank you again to Stephen and his extended family and his friends and loved ones. And keep working in him and in his life, and offer your glory, God. In the name of Jesus, I pray, amen. Stephen, sir, it's been an honor. Please keep in touch. I know you're busy, but I'll probably message you now and then to see how you're doing and, see how things are going on in life. And I hope I gained a friend through this, and not just somebody I just wanted to interview. Almost everybody I've interviewed, I've become really close with and talk to on a pretty regular basis. So, Stephen L Randell, everybody, please go out and get the book.
All right.
This is incredible.
All right.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I appreciate you.
All right. Thank you. You as well. I appreciate it. We'll talk soon.
Yep, you bet.
All right.
Bye.
Good night.